From guys hiding under your mom's bed, to men showing up at your night shift opening and closing doors, grab a blanket, turn off your lights, for 3 true scary after midnight horror stories number 5. Looking under the bed saved my mom's life. So this incident happened to my mom before she had me over 20 years ago. She worked at a local pub. The pub mainly catered for fishermen as the town is on the coast of Western Australia. So she knew most of the people who would come in for drinks or a feed. However, every now and again, people from town would come in. She told me one bloke used to come in who she known from house parties around the place, and always wanted to talk to her while she was working, and would say sorry and kept doing her thing. One night she finished work at around midnight and walked home, which was a few kilometers away. She lived with a few housemates who were blokes, all good mates. When she got home from her shift, she decided to have a shower. Making her way back to her room, she realized her door was open, which is normally shut. All the fellas were asleep, so she blew it off as wind or something. She lay down in bed to go to sleep, but something didn't feel right, and for reasons she can't explain to me, she felt the need to look under her bed. What she saw under the bed was the bloke from the bar who had followed her all the way from her work. She tells me that she just stared at him for ages, and he didn't move, not even breathe, to the point she thought he was dead. She went out the room calmly and went to one of the guys' rooms to tell them she had a dead bloke under her bed. They raced in with baseball bats to find the guy halfway out the window. He managed to escape and run away. The police were called because they knew who he was. The cops picked him up the next day. The thing that bothers me the most is what his intentions were with my mom that night. Asshole got a fine and was never allowed back in town. Too soft, in my opinion. The man in the yard. I've been procrastinating so hard the past several hours, reading these stories when I should be writing a paper, so instead of writing the paper, I'll contribute my own story. This is a great subreddit, thank you for sharing your experiences. Me, female, 25, setting, nice neighborhood, suburban Midwest. One of my biggest fears is someone breaking into my home. I am an extremely light sleeper, so the slightest noise, light, anything otherwise disturbing the darkness and silence as I sleep will wake me. My parents live in a neighborhood that is very nice, very wealthy, heavily wooded with houses quite close to one another until you reach the end of it, where our house was located. The houses are a bit further apart, and until recently, it was far less built up than the area near the entrance. Our yard isn't too large, and there aren't mature trees, but there is a large field that breaks up our neighborhood, and the one behind it. We have a ranch-style house, and my bedroom has 2 large windows that gives me a view to the front yard. From my bed, I can see the yard lamp that provides a rather small pool of light. Just beyond that is the road. The other window looked into part of my backyard. Preface of sorts. When I was in high school, my boyfriend used to sneak over to stay the night quite a few times. This is a rather disgusting detail, but he would open up my bedroom window that looked into the backyard in order to take a piss. One night at about 12 a.m. mid-piss, he sort of freaked out, saying he saw someone walking around the backyard. He quickly adjusted himself, closed the window, and I took a look out back. I could vaguely see an outline of someone surveying the property, almost near the deck. I panicked and immediately ran out to go wake up my dad. He jumps out of bed, sort of storms out to the deck, turns the outside lights on and looks around. He can't see anything, so he decides to go have a walk around the deck again. Nothing. He goes back to bed. I'm terrified. 2 more bizarre instances occurred, the second one also involving my boyfriend during high school. His mother was compliant with him staying over for a bit, because she understood my dad was strict, so She had agreed to come pick him up in the evening when my dad wouldn't allow him there. She would park quite a bit up the street and wait for him to jump out my window and walk over. This evening, at about 11 p.m., while after my dad went to sleep, my boyfriend left, and I watched as he slowly made his way through the dark yard. I could see his mother's car in the distance. Abruptly, I saw his figure gain speed, swiftly walking until he broke out in a sprint towards the headlights. I was confused, but assumed that he was eager to get to her car. As soon as her car took off, however, he called me on his mother's cell phone, saying that someone was watching him and started to chase him. I was afraid and sort of doubted his story, but I decided I didn't want to bother my dad yet again. I tried to sleep it off. Fast forward to 3 years later, when I was 19, I was back home for the summer from college. I was enrolled in a summer language program, and I had gotten back from work at around 10 p.m. at night. I needed to do homework and was up quite late working. Near 1 a.m. in the morning, I noticed that something wasn't right with the yard lamp out front. My curtains are quite thin, so a change in the light was noticeable. I pulled them slightly open and saw what appeared to be a person standing in front of it, to where they were blocking the glow. Then, a red cloth was thrown over the light. I was terrified, not knowing what the hell was going on, so I threw my books, ran to my dad's room, and woke him up. He looks out the front windows near the door, sees a red cloth, and mutters a "what the fuck" before walking out front. He takes off the cloth, looks around, and comes back inside. It was a red towel. He says it's probably some dumb kids, puts a towel in the laundry room, and he went back to bed. I was still anxious and creeped out, thinking it was some kind of marker or symbol for something. I'll add that after washing the towel, it is the linen closet in the bathroom in regular use by my household. Facepalm. The story of stories. I wanted to include the above instances to give you an idea of how I developed my anxiety and general uneasiness about prowlers, potential intruders, creepers, etc. Now, this instance occurred over the summer, when I was again staying at my parents' house for a few months before moving to another city. As I said, I'm a very light sleeper, and the curtains that my mother put up in my bedroom are nearly sheer. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning, and I was fast asleep. The sound of a vehicle stirred me awake, and I saw the glare of headlights out front through the curtains. I immediately sat up and opened the curtains. It was a truck that was sitting out front of the driveway, and then started to drive on slowly. I assumed it was the paper deliverer, and was about to collapse back into bed when I saw them abruptly hit the brakes a few feet away from our driveway. From their headlights, I clearly saw a figure of a man walking in front of them. The truck stayed put for about 5 seconds after the man passed in front of them and then sped off. I watched, frozen, scared, wondering what the hell I was watching. From the shallow light of the lamp out front, I could make out the person walking in our yard, and from my perspective, approaching quite quickly and in my mind with a purpose. I shot out of bed and went to the guest room that was right next to mine and looked out the window because it afforded a better, more complete view of the front yard. There was a man standing right at the edge of the circle of light the lamp gave off. Terrified, I woke up my parents, practically screaming and shaking. My dad, now a very wary veteran of these wake-up calls, dutifully strolls out the bedroom, turns on the outside lights, and goes outside. At the same time, I ran back to the guest bedroom to watch the figure. As soon as that happened, I saw him retreat into the darkness, and I could no longer see him anymore. My dad says he's gone, and groggily goes back to bed. My mother is less convinced and stays up and sits in the family room. After conversing with her briefly about how I'm never sleeping again, I go back to the guest room, of course. The man has reappeared, from what I could make out. From the light given off by the lamp, he was facing our house. I march out of the room, declaring he's back, fuck this shit, I'm calling 911. I grab the phone, dial, and talk to the dispatcher. Meanwhile, the man steps a bit forward, just enough that I could see something glint in the lights. Something metal. Something long. It looked like a knife. I'm explaining this as best as I can to the dispatcher. They say they will send a policeman out to survey, and asked if I wanted to give a statement or if I just want them to patrol the area. I said that since I can't see the face, etc., or give any useful information at this point, that I didn't want to give a statement or talk to the officer. Just then, the man steps back, and I couldn't make out his image any longer. I stood there watching and told the dispatcher that he disappeared. Due to the well-lit yard of our neighbors across the street, however, I was able to see that he had made his way up to their driveway and was crouching up it, and then he disappeared from my sight in the massive shrubs that shrouded the front of the house. I informed the dispatcher of this, and we ended the call. Within minutes, a police cruiser approached. Unfortunately, all they did was drive up and down once, no spotlight, nothing. They stopped at the end of our street for a moment, then sped off. A few minutes after the police had left, the neighbors across the street turned on all of their house lights. I assumed they had heard and noticed something amiss. At this point, it was about 4 a.m. My mother and I were both unable to sleep. We kept a lookout on our neighbors' houses. In a few hours, when it was daybreak, and an acceptable enough hour, we told our neighbors what we saw to warn them. The people across the street admitted to being awakened by some noise out front and were feeling uneasy. The next night, both of my parents loaded their gun of choice and kept it near their side of the bed. I took a Xanax with a big glass of wine. Then, I moved away anyways. I'll be back home next week. So, after reading these stories here, some way creepier and far more dangerous, of course, I start to feel a bit nostalgic and unnerved. I don't know what the hell to make of all these experiences. I'm far more conscious of this than my parents. These experiences have only proved to me how important it is to do this no matter how secure you feel in your community. True Creepy Night Shift. That's a true story that happened to me years ago. I'm from Germany and worked at an old people's home in a little German town at the time. The facility was in a rural area on the outskirts of town. One night, I had night shifts with a new coworker I'd never worked before. He was in the mid-50s, wearing little round glasses, and for some reason seemed a little strange to me on the first sight. There's always only were 2 workers alone in the facility at night, and our job was to watch over 100 rooms and dwellers on 3 floors and make control rounds through the whole facility. We weren't allowed to use the elevators for security reasons at night and had to use the stairways instead. I remember the strange weather that night. It was stormy and wild outside while my shift started at about 10 p.m. at night. At this time, most of the people were gone. Only one older nurse was in the station room on the 2nd floor, where we had our headquarters at night. She wasn't used to the newer PC programs, and it took her longer to finish her writing stuff. So me and my coworker started our first round throughout the house, using the stairways, which had heavy doors we had to close slowly and carefully every time to avoid noises. Everything was quiet. Most old people were sleeping already, and after we checked all the rooms, we sat down in the 2nd floor station room and finished some paperwork. The old nurse was gone, all doors to the outside shut, and the house was completely quiet when we were sitting on the table. After 15 minutes sitting in the silence, suddenly a heavy door in the stairway was smashed hard. We looked at each other without saying anything and immediately run to the stairway. I run up the 3rd floor, and my workmate sprinted down on the ground floor. We saw nothing and nobody. We even checked the stairway windows. All were closed. Someone must have been in the stairway, we concluded. As we found nothing, we continued our tour starting from the 3rd floor down to the ground floor. From there, I could not stop thinking who the hell would sneak around the floors in the middle of the night. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning when we had to change the double sheets from an old invalid man who pissed in his bed. I stood in the corner of the room besides the bed, backed up against the wall. My coworker was on the other side of the bed. I remember me watching the door, waiting for someone to peer into the room. While I was concentrating on the door and lost in my thoughts, suddenly, my coworker freaked out, screaming at the old man out of nothing, ripping around the sheets and tossing around the old man. His face got an angry, creepy look to it, and I was totally shocked and not able to say or do anything. I just watched this creepy guy in front of me with the totally black windows behind him, and the door leading to the dark floors where some creep sneaked around unseen. I stood there, pressed on the wall in the corner of that room, and felt totally lost, surrounded by psychopaths. We finally reached the ground floor, and everything was quiet, only the wind blowing around the house. Suddenly, we heard the sound of something dropping, like someone dropped a knife or something metallic. The sound came from the kitchen area. We run to the closed glass door where the sound came from. It was a long dark hallway with a back door leading to the trash cans and parking lot at the end. We opened the door and searched every single room. I felt extremely uncomfortable and expected an attack at any moment. Again, we found nothing. Some hours later, we started our last tour for the night. We split up this time and I checked the rooms like usual. When I looked into one room, an old lady was awake and sitting on her bed. She asked me if I was in her room 5 minutes ago. I said no, and that we just started our tour. She told me that 5 minutes ago, she clearly heard someone entering her room. She asked who was there, but didn't get any answers back. Then, the door was closed again. I got an extremely creepy feeling while listening to this old lady, and just her talking. I told her blatantly just to push the alarm button next time something like this ever happens again. I think it is unnecessary to say how I felt for the next hours of the night every time I entered a room or walked around a corner. I expected at any moment some weird stranger standing there all the time. I was more than glad when this damn shift was finally over. Eventually, some days later, I met the old nurse who left the facility late at night and told her this whole story. She told me that the back door to the kitchen area was wide open. When she went to her car that night, she left us. She reached the open dark back door from the parking lot and called if somebody is there. Suddenly, at that moment, she got a very, very bad feeling, so she turned around and ran to her car and drove off really fast. She said she was totally scared and tried to reach and warn us but couldn't find the number. I told her that the back door was definitely closed when we checked the area. So in conclusion, we never found out what creepy freaks sneaked around there at night, and on many nights, shift worker reported similar experiences the following month. The coworker I had to work with that night was fired after more and more complaints about his personality emerged over time. Anyways, that's another story completely and not relevant. Anyways, I'm glad I don't have to work there anymore, and never will make any night shifts again.